I have criticized Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos for what he's allowed the Washington Post to become in the past. But I think refusing to endorse a presidential candidate and the editorial that he published yesterday evening on the Washington Post website, and I presume in the print edition of the newspaper, is 100% the right move. And I give him credit for that. And let me take you back a little bit. I love newspapers. I absolutely love reading print newspapers. I'm going to be the last guy on the planet walking on to airplanes with like 5 or 6 different print newspapers to read. I have loved print newspapers all over the world. When I travel, I buy print newspapers. I still like to talk with people out there who will listen to me about how much I enjoyed buying all the newspapers, traveling around in Australia, reading all of those. The Australian newspaper, by the way, is incredible. Didn't even know it existed until I was over there. Fabulous read. When I travel and I'm at the airport, let's say, for instance, in New York, I will buy the New York Post. I will buy the New York Times. I will buy the Wall Street Journal. I will load up. When I'm in Washington, D.C., I'll buy the Washington Post. And I was a longtime subscriber to the Washington Post during college, all 4 years. I would read every newspaper. They were trying to get kids to read newspapers back in the day, and we could get the USA Today, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal for free every day, and I would read all 4 newspapers every day. I still read Washington Post. I'm a subscriber, New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal every day, and I get the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times delivered to my house. Okay, that's all background. The Washington Post used to be a great newspaper. And I wrote about this in American Playbook, and I'm a student and like to learn about the history of media. And the Washington Post lost its way after Trump won in 2016. I think they were wrong to put "Democracy Dies in Darkness" at the top of the newspaper. I think they were wrong to treat Donald Trump as some sort of existential threat to the country. I think they were wrong to become a partisan hack of a newspaper when, in my experience, during the 90s, the late 90s, they covered Bill Clinton aggressively in a negative way, just like they did Richard Nixon. I think that newspapers should speak truth to power and hold accountable people accountable in a rational way in both directions, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. And what we have seen, and Jeff Bezos laid this out quite clearly, is there has been a total and complete collapse in the credibility of the American media. In particular, media since the last several years has utterly collapsed. And I'm going to grab what Bezos said, and I'm going to read a couple of the opinions that he laid out. And he said, and I talked about this on the program, Gallup, in the latest Gallup poll, only about 30% of Americans trust the news media. And he says, in order, I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. Lack of credibility isn't unique to the Washington Post. Our brethren newspapers have the same issue. It's a problem not only for media, but also for the nation. While I do not and will not push my personal interest, I won't allow this paper to stay on autopilot and fade into irrelevance, not without a fight. Too important. Now more than ever, the world needs a credible, trusted, independent voice, and where better for that voice to originate than the capital city of the most important country in the world? To win this fight, we're going to have to exercise new muscles. Some changes will be a return to the past, such as not endorsing presidential candidates, and some will be new inventions. Criticism will be part and parcel of anything new. This is the way of the world. None of this will be easy, but it will be worth it. And I think he's right. You can't have the Washington Post turn into a left-wing fan rag of the Democrat Party because it destroys the overall brand itself and also just fairness in journalism. And let me share something with you. The 250,000 people who have canceled their Washington Post subscriptions, and I am a subscriber, so I am still subscribed. That's 10% of the overall subscribers. You're telling on yourself. You are saying that you don't want actual news. You want left-wing propaganda. You are paying basically for a fan site like I pay, or you may have paid for Rivals 24/7 or on 3 fan subscription sites in the past. That's what's going on here. And so you're telling on yourself, they didn't endorse my chosen candidate, and therefore I will not pay for their product, is a petty and petulant, childlike response. And the reality is, Jeff Bezos is so rich that he can afford to run the Washington Post losing money, and it doesn't really change his overall wealth. But it does raise the question of what in the world has gone on that the Washington Post, which used to be one of the greatest newspapers anywhere, and also the New York Times, have so lost their way that a huge percentage of the public doesn't trust their reporting or even care very much about it anymore. I think that's a fundamental failure. And there is a report that Bezos wants more conservative writers at the Washington Post. And that makes sense to me. If your goal is to give the news to the majority of America, then what in the world is going on? And let me just hammer this. If everybody has the same opinion at a newspaper, you're going to be flawed. And let me hammer this home a little bit. There is no right-wing equivalent of the New York Times or the Washington Post. And I do think that if the Post and the Times don't evolve, there will be a huge media opportunity there. Now, you can say the Wall Street Journal, but the Wall Street Journal really, and I love it, is focused more on the day-to-day business world than it is purely politics, right? It's the business Bible, so to speak, of Wall Street. It's not really super partisan. It's kind of a little bit right of center from a business perspective. Probably aligns a lot with my views, but there isn't anything like the New York Times or the Washington Post in major media today from a print publication, from a newspaper perspective. Now, the New York Post, OutKick, there are assets that Fox owns that have huge audiences, but I feel like there is an opportunity out there to do the equivalent of the New York Times and the Washington Post, just from a centrist perspective, a little bit right of center, because they've gone so far left wing in the way that they cover the media, that I feel like there's an opportunity there. And my point on where the opportunity would lie is, like, just look at television news. Fox News has, on many days, the equivalent of CNN and MSNBC's audience combined, and still no real major competition in cable. But there isn't a Fox News in a newspaper. I would also add that OutKick is basically Fox News for sports, in that we cover basically the vast majority of the American sporting public in a way that's centrist. And then there's a fight on the 20% of people who are super left wing. It's kind of extraordinary to me that we still don't have a lot of competition.